Marcus Bennett stepped into the bustling terminal with quiet dignity, clutching his first-class ticket as if it were both a hard-won prize and a fragile symbol of hope. "Excuse me, young man," said the flight attendant in a tone that was ice-cold despite her attempt at courtesy. Marcus's deep, steady voice replied, "I have a valid ticket," as he met her scornful eyes. The woman, Claudia Harper, offered a mocking smile that barely concealed her inner contempt. "Either you leave on your own or let security handle it," she said in a clipped, rehearsed tone. What she failed to realize was that Marcus was not merely an ordinary passenger. He was the beloved son of a self-made aviation mogul who had risen from humble beginnings. Yet Marcus never boasted about his lineage, preferring instead to be recognized for his quiet strength and academic achievements. His calm exterior belied the storm of injustice brewing beneath, and even as he held his ticket, printed boldly with the words "First Class," a subtle yet seething conflict was already unfolding between him and Claudia, whose prejudice was as deeply rooted as it was cruel. The polished floor of the international airport glistened under the bright overhead lights, reflecting the hurried steps of travelers clad in neatly pressed suits and stylish dresses. Amid this whirlwind of activity, Marcus moved with a measured grace that set him apart from the crowd. His small, well-worn suitcase rolled alongside him, a silent companion on a journey that was as much about physical travel as it was about overcoming obstacles. Today was not just any day, it was the day that marked the culmination of years of hard study, a day when a determined young man from a modest background earned a full scholarship to one of America's top universities. Marcus's heart swelled with both pride and apprehension as he navigated the maze of corridors and check-in counters, aware that every step he took was being silently measured by those who judged him solely by the color of his skin. Even as he adjusted the strap of his backpack and scanned the bustling scene, he couldn't help but wonder if his presence in first class was a challenge too audacious for the narrow minds around him. Inside the plush first-class lounge, the ambiance was designed to soothe with its soft jazz playing in the background, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the gentle hum of conversation. Marcus found a quiet corner among the luxurious leather chairs, and as he set his steaming hot chocolate on the table, he sent a brief text message to his father. "I'm about to board the plane, Dad. Hope to see you soon," he typed with a hopeful smile, recalling his father's warm response, "Enjoy your trip, son. I'll be waiting for you at home." That simple exchange was a cherished reminder of the unwavering love and support that had carried him through countless challenges. But the serenity of the lounge was about to shatter as Claudia's icy gaze found him once more. Known for her nearly 2 decades of service on international flights, Claudia prided herself on maintaining an impeccable appearance, from her meticulously styled dark blonde hair to the precise way she adjusted her uniform collar. However, beneath the surface of her polished exterior lurked an attitude fueled by prejudice and a desire to assert dominance over anyone who did not conform to her narrow standards. Claudia's eyes narrowed as she took in every detail of Marcus's appearance. His lightly curled hair, his simple hoodie, and the well-worn sneakers that had seen better days stood in stark contrast to the flashy attire of the other privileged travelers. Instead of admiring the quiet determination in his eyes, Claudia's gaze hardened, fixated not on his accomplishments or the promise of his future, but solely on his skin color and modest dress. Leaning toward a younger attendant who was busy organizing documents at the service counter, Claudia whispered in a tone that dripped with disdain, "First class really is accessible to anyone these days." That remark, laden with contempt, was not meant to be overheard, yet the hushed cruelty in her voice spread like a chill through the air. The younger attendant's eyes flickered with uncertainty, caught between the instinct to smile in politeness and the urge to remain silent. Marcus, unaware of the full extent of the venom in Claudia's words, simply sipped his hot chocolate and tried to ignore the tightening in his chest, a familiar feeling that had accompanied him through many such moments of quiet discrimination. For Marcus, each subtle glance and dismissive remark was a painful reminder of the societal barriers he had long fought against. Over the years, he had learned to mask his hurt with calm determination, choosing instead to focus on his dreams and the promise of a better future. However, this day felt different. There was a palpable tension that hinted at a deeper conflict, a simmering hostility that threatened to boil over at any moment. As he scanned the room with cautious optimism, he could not shake the feeling that every step he took was being scrutinized, every action judged by eyes that were unkind and unyielding. And so, with his heart pounding in anticipation and a mind braced for the unexpected, he rose from his seat and made his way toward the boarding gate. Each step a silent act of defiance against the cruelty that sought to define him. At the boarding gate, the atmosphere grew charged with an undercurrent of unease. While other passengers were met with warm smiles and courteous greetings, Marcus encountered a cold dismissal from Claudia, whose carefully applied makeup did little to mask the disdain in her eyes. One by one, passengers in elegant attire received personalized farewells from her. A middle-aged gentleman in a light-colored suit was wished a safe flight in a voice as sweet as honey, and a blonde woman with a designer handbag was greeted with a respectful nod and a gentle smile. But when it was Marcus's turn, Claudia's pleasant demeanor vanished in an instant. She glanced at the ticket he offered, and as her eyes fell upon the bold print proclaiming first class, her expression contorted into a mix of incredulity and hostility. Without a word of warmth or the slightest hint of courtesy, she fixed him with a look that said he did not belong among the refined travelers. "Are you sure you're at the right gate?" she asked coolly, gesturing vaguely toward the crowded economy section behind them. Her voice, though measured, carried a sharpness that cut deeper than any insult. Marcus hesitated for a brief moment, his eyes flickering with a mixture of confusion and hurt. Gathering his resolve, he raised the ticket slightly so that its message was undeniable, and repeated softly, "Yes, my ticket clearly states first class." Instead of acknowledging the validity of his claim, Claudia's eyes narrowed further, and a sneer began to form on her lips as she drawled, "There might be some mistake in the system. First class isn't for everyone." Her tone was mocking, and every word dripped with a cruelty that left no doubt about her prejudice. In that instant, the warmth of the lounge and the promise of a joyful reunion with his father seemed to vanish, replaced by an overwhelming sense of isolation and injustice. For Marcus, who had always carried his struggles with quiet perseverance, this encounter felt like an unjust trial, a moment where his very identity was being put on display as something unworthy in the eyes of a heart hardened by bigotry. Deep down, Marcus felt the sting of every word, each one a reminder that despite his achievements and the love that buoyed him, the world could be unkind to those who dared to be different. He recalled the countless evenings spent poring over textbooks in a modest room, the long nights of self-doubt, and the sacrifices made along the way. All of that had led him to this moment, a moment that should have been filled with pride and anticipation, yet was marred by the cruelty of a woman determined to diminish his worth. Claudia's actions, driven by her narrow-minded beliefs and an insatiable need to enforce her outdated standards, seemed less like professional duty and more like a personal vendetta against a young man who dared to rise above the constraints of prejudice. The board's call for first-class passengers was now a haunting echo, a reminder that even in spaces designed for comfort and celebration, cruelty could lurk beneath a veneer of civility. As Marcus stepped forward, the bustling sounds of the boarding process seemed to fade into the background. Each step he took was measured, every breath laden with the weight of a past marred by discrimination and the hope for a better future. In that charged moment, the conflict between him and Claudia transformed into a larger struggle, a battle not only for a seat on a plane, but for the right to be seen, heard, and respected for who he truly was. The gentle hum of the airport, the aroma of fresh coffee, and the soft strains of jazz in the background all conspired to create a surreal juxtaposition of luxury and injustice. It was a scene that would haunt anyone with a kind heart, especially someone who had witnessed too much cruelty in a world that was supposed to be just and fair. And as the boarding process continued, Marcus's resolve only grew stronger, even as a profound sadness welled up inside him for the wounded spirit that was forced to endure such indignity. The storm of conflict was just beginning to take shape, and though Marcus's face remained composed, every fiber of his being yearned for the warmth and acceptance he so desperately deserved. His journey was far more than a simple flight. It was a passage through the turbulent skies of prejudice and a courageous stand against the cruelty of those who would diminish his light. In that moment, with every passing second, the gentle hope of reuniting with his loving father clashed with the bitter reality of a world unwilling to let go of its prejudices. And so, as he prepared to board the plane with quiet determination, Marcus carried with him not only the weight of his past struggles, but also the fierce conviction that one day, the warmth of each detail of that day, the polished floors of the airport, the soft hum of first-class comforts, and the sting of Claudia Harper's spiteful words wove together to create a narrative that was as heartbreaking as it was inspiring. For those of us who have seen our share of life's trials, Marcus's story resonates deeply, evoking memories of times when kindness was overshadowed by cruelty, and when hope had to be fought for with every ounce of courage. His silent, steadfast refusal to be defined by the narrow judgments of others is a reminder that while the world may sometimes be unkind, our capacity for resilience and compassion remains our truest strength. And as we listen to his journey unfold, we cannot help but feel both the weight of his sorrows and the brightness of his dreams, knowing that even in the face of relentless cruelty, the human spirit continues to rise, defiant and unbroken. Marcus felt his ears burn as Claudia's words, though coded in a deceptively gentle tone, sliced through the air like a razor-sharp blade. He gripped the strap of his backpack as if it were a lifeline, silently gathering his resolve while behind him passengers began to murmur among themselves. Their curious gazes, mixed with raised eyebrows and furtive whispers, weighed him down with unspoken judgment. Some looked at him as though they were silently questioning whether a young man like him truly belonged in this refined space, while others shifted their attention to Claudia, waiting to see how this unfolding drama would resolve. Taking a deep, steady breath, Marcus met Claudia's eyes and spoke in a calm yet firm voice. "My ticket is perfectly valid. You can check it again if you need to, but I am absolutely sure I am in the right place," he declared. In that charged moment, their eyes locked in a silent battle. On one side, Claudia's icy, haughty glare, steeped in years of arrogance and deep-rooted prejudice. On the other, Marcus's unwavering, dignified stare, which told of a young man who knew his worth and refused to be cowed by spiteful words. Marcus's steady confidence only ignited Claudia's cruel determination. Instead of accepting his polite assurance, she let her disdain widen, clearly intent on pushing him further until his calm resolve would finally shatter. The tension in the boarding area thickened perceptibly, as if the very air had grown heavy with disdain and anticipation. The soft sound of rolling suitcases and the quiet murmur of discontent from nearby passengers added to the oppressive atmosphere, making every heartbeat feel like a silent protest against the injustice unfolding. Standing tall, Marcus raised his ticket higher, holding it firmly in both hands so that every onlooker could see the unmistakable proof of his rightful place. His voice, soft but clear, resonated as he said, "I am sure there is no mistake. This is a first-class ticket, purchased well in advance with all details in order, and I am more than willing to wait while you verify it." Claudia's irritation grew by the second as she absorbed his calm defiance. In her mind, people like Marcus, young, black, and dressed modestly, were supposed to crumble under even the slightest pressure, to mutter a half-hearted apology and then quietly shuffle over to the economy class area, the place she believed they truly belonged. Marcus's refusal to conform to her discriminatory expectations only stoked the embers of her bitterness. With a subtle pursing of her meticulously painted lips and a disdainful tilt of her head, Claudia scrutinized the ticket as if searching for an invisible flaw. After a pause that seemed to stretch on forever, she spoke slowly, each drawn-out word dripping with derision. "In these times, the system sometimes makes mistakes. This first-class cabin, you know, is usually not for people like you." The implication of her words hung in the air, a sinister suggestion that Marcus's presence in this elite space was not only unexpected, but fundamentally wrong. Marcus felt a familiar heaviness in his chest, a quiet sorrow born of years of encountering such cruelty. Yet, despite the sting in his heart, he recalled every lesson his father had taught him about preserving dignity in the face of injustice. With his voice remaining as calm and resolute as ever, he responded, "I believe that the system works accurately, and I trust that my presence here with this ticket is entirely valid. If there is any uncertainty, I am perfectly willing to wait while security verifies it." His words, gentle yet firm, echoed like a quiet anthem of self-respect that resonated deeply with those in the vicinity, especially among the older passengers who had seen too many instances of unmerited prejudice in their long lives. As Marcus spoke, the atmosphere around the boarding gate shifted subtly. A few elderly travelers exchanged sympathetic glances and murmurs of disapproval, their faces etched with the lines of experience and wisdom. They remembered too well the sting of unjust treatment, and now saw in Marcus a mirror of the innocent souls who had once been forced to endure similar indignities. Meanwhile, the orderly line of passengers, initially quiet and respectful, began to fidget and whisper, their collective attention now focused on the unfolding confrontation between Marcus and Claudia. Noticing that her tactics were drawing more attention than she had anticipated, Claudia straightened her posture and attempted once again to assert her authority. Her voice, now tinged with impatience and a thinly veiled malice, cut through the murmurs as she said, "Then just stand here and wait. I will check again, but do not expect the outcome to be what you think." With that, she turned her attention to the digital passenger list on her tablet, deliberately prolonging the moment of uncertainty and making it clear that, in her view, Marcus did not belong in this luxurious space. Every passing second seemed to stretch into an eternity as Marcus remained rooted to the spot, clutching his ticket as if it were the embodiment of his hard-fought achievements. In that moment, as the silent judgment from every corner of the boarding area pressed in on him, Marcus's resolve only grew stronger. The whispers behind him became a chorus of quiet empathy, a testament to the shared understanding among the passengers that his struggle was not just about a ticket, but about a much larger battle against ingrained discrimination. He could feel the weight of every disapproving look, every furtive nod of condemnation, yet he stood tall. His eyes shone with an inner light, a defiant glow that challenged the cruelty of the moment, even as each second felt laden with sorrow. Then, in a calculated move meant to reassert her dominance and silence any hint of dissent, Claudia returned holding her tablet with the passenger list displayed. Her expression, though carefully composed, betrayed a hint of satisfaction as she approached Marcus once more. Lowering her head slightly to ensure that her words carried a private sting while still being audible to nearby passengers, she said, "I will say this one last time, young man. This place is really not for people like you." She paused deliberately, letting her words linger in the charged air, before adding in a tone thick with sarcasm, "If you refuse to cooperate, I will have to call security." The statement, though softly spoken, fell like a heavy stone upon the space between them, intensifying the sense of isolation that Marcus already felt. Marcus's heart ached at the cruel finality of her words, yet he did not falter. With measured dignity, he lowered his ticket to chest level and gently turned it so that the passenger information faced Claudia. His voice remained steady and resolute as he replied, "I do not believe that is the way a head stewardess should speak to a first-class passenger. I am willing to wait here, and if necessary, I will let security verify my ticket. "I am not leaving when I have done nothing wrong." His calm declaration cut through the tension, a clear statement of his right to be treated with respect, regardless of Claudia's narrow-minded views. For several long, heavy seconds, silence reigned over the boarding area. Every passenger present seemed to pause in collective empathy, absorbing Marcus's words as if they were a plea for fairness in a world that too often ignored it. Some of the older travelers shook their heads in quiet disapproval, while others exchanged looks that spoke volumes about the injustices they had witnessed in their own lives. It was a moment of shared understanding, a silent promise that no one, regardless of their background, should ever have to endure such unmerited cruelty. In a final attempt to reassert control, Claudia pressed her lips together tightly and glanced over her shoulder at the growing crowd. Noticing that her actions had only amplified the scrutiny upon her, she gave a slight nod to herself and then spoke in a tone that dripped with condescension. "Well then, wait a little longer. Let's see who truly does not belong here." A faint, self-satisfied smile played at the corners of her mouth as she signaled for her colleague to contact security. Her words, laced with a perverse pleasure in inflicting discomfort, sealed the atmosphere with a promise of further humiliation to come. Standing there, with every pair of eyes fixed upon him and every whispered judgment weighing heavily in the air, Marcus felt an overwhelming mixture of sorrow and defiance. Each second of this ordeal deepened the wounds inflicted by years of discrimination, yet it also strengthened his determination to hold on to his dignity. He knew that he had done nothing wrong, and that his right to occupy that seat was indisputable. In that moment, amid the oppressive tension and the echoing cruelty of Claudia's voice, Marcus's quiet strength shone like a beacon. His steadfast refusal to succumb to the unjust treatment before him resonated deeply with those who witnessed the confrontation, drawing forth empathy and a shared sense of moral outrage from even the most reserved onlookers. Every detail of that moment, the sound of whispered disapproval, the weight of each scrutinizing glance, and the cold finality of Claudia's parting words, wove together into a narrative of quiet heroism amid blatant injustice. Marcus's struggle was not just a personal battle. It was a powerful reminder that the fight against prejudice is fought one courageous stand at a time. Even as the security call loomed on the horizon, threatening to escalate the tension further, Marcus remained a symbol of unyielding dignity, determined to hold his ground and let his truth speak louder than the venomous words aimed at him. In that charged, poignant atmosphere, Marcus's story became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. His quiet defiance, delivered with gentle yet unbreakable resolve, touched the hearts of those around him. And as he waited, his gaze unwavering and his heart heavy yet hopeful, he silently vowed that one day, the narrow, hateful standards that sought to diminish his worth would crumble before the undeniable truth of his character. Marcus felt as if he were caught in a game of chess that was rapidly spiraling out of control. Standing firm, his hands lightly gripped the straps of his backpack while his steady gaze challenged Claudia Harper with an unspoken defiance. In that moment, even though his heart pounded with quiet indignation, Marcus refused to let her cruel words shake his resolve. Yet, as if on cue, two security guards in crisp uniforms emerged from the distant hallway leading to the plane's entrance. The steady tapping of their shoes on the polished floor resonated like the cold, final beat of an unavoidable verdict, drawing curious and apprehensive glances from nearby passengers. Claudia wasted no time in seizing this opportunity to further assert her authority. With an air of practiced command, she turned and strode purposefully toward the security guards. In hushed tones meant only for their ears, she exchanged a few brisk words, her face locked in a stern, unyielding expression that suggested the situation was far graver than it really was. Marcus, though his eyes followed every subtle movement with calm determination, felt a flicker of dread deep within. He knew what was coming, yet held on to a faint hope that truth and fairness might still prevail. Before he could muster any further protest, one of the officers stepped forward, bowing his head slightly before speaking in a polite but firm tone. "Please follow us. We'll guide you to the assigned seat." In that instant, Marcus tightened the straps on his backpack and bit his lip, a brief hesitation betraying the pain he felt at yet another attempt to strip him of his dignity. He realized that any attempt at explanation would be like tossing pebbles against an impenetrable wall already shrouded in prejudice. There was no room for debate here, at least not in the eyes of those who seemed content to let injustice pass without intervention. Some passengers looked at him with sympathetic pity, their eyes filled with quiet sorrow as if they too had once faced similar indignities. Others frowned or shook their heads in annoyance, convinced that Marcus's silent defiance was the cause of the delay, a disruption to the refined order of the first-class cabin. A few maintained cold, indifferent stares as though his struggle was simply a trivial inconvenience on a long, uneventful journey. With a deep, measured breath, Marcus nodded his acceptance of the situation and allowed the security guards to escort him, his back remaining straight even as each step felt weighed down by an indescribable burden of injustice. The guards led him through rows of luxurious seats, while the eyes of his fellow travelers, some full of expectation and others brimming with quiet disapproval, followed his every move. They seemed to be waiting with bated breath, uncertain whether he would hang his head in defeat or continue to walk with his head held high, silently enduring the humiliation thrust upon him. Marcus felt the sting of being forcefully moved away from a place that was rightfully his, not out of any sense of personal inferiority, but because of a blatant injustice that no one in that polished corridor had the courage to openly challenge. When the door separating the first-class cabin from the rest of the aircraft closed behind him, Marcus found himself in the cramped confines of the economy section. He slumped into a narrow window seat, his eyes fixated on the small pane of glass through which faint rays of sunlight timidly pressed against the surface. His lips pressed together so tightly that any expression of pain might betray the inner turmoil he was valiantly trying to conceal. Gathering every ounce of composure he had left, Marcus slowly took out his phone and began typing a message that was both a quiet plea for understanding and a firm declaration of his innocence. "Dad, they moved me to economy. The flight attendant said my ticket was a mistake, but I know it isn't. I don't want to make a scene, but this is really unfair." With a heavy heart, he leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes for several moments, striving to recapture the balance that had been so brutally disrupted by Claudia's cruelty and the rigid machinery of an indifferent system. Marcus was unsure of what would come next, yet he clung to the belief instilled in him by his father, Victor Bennett, a man who had never allowed injustice to go unchallenged. Deep down, Marcus trusted that his father's quiet vigilance would soon ignite a response. Meanwhile, on the other side of the closed door that separated first class from economy, Claudia Harper maintained a light, almost self-satisfied smile. She casually scanned the well-appointed cabin, seemingly oblivious to the magnitude of the storm she had just unleashed. To her, the matter appeared to be nothing more than a minor inconvenience, an acceptable price to pay for maintaining the pristine order she so dearly prized. Inside the dim, crowded economy cabin, where the weak light barely illuminated the weary faces of passengers absorbed in their phones or dozing in reluctant slumber, Marcus exhaled a soft, resigned sigh. His message had been seen. His father had acknowledged it with that all-too-familiar "seen" notification, but no comforting words followed. He knew that silence from Victor Bennett was the precursor to action, a signal that his father was mobilizing behind the scenes. Almost immediately, high above the murmurs of the passengers, the emergency internal phone in the cockpit rang with a brief, insistent chime. The captain, a man in his 50s with keen, scrutinizing eyes and a reputation for steady command over hundreds of intercontinental flights, glanced at the caller ID. The display showed a priority line from the top echelons of the airline's management, and the name that appeared made it unmistakably clear. Victor Bennett. The captain's expression shifted in an instant. Without delay, he answered the call, his demeanor shifting from casual professionalism to one of immediate concern. On the other end of the line, a gentle yet uncompromising voice spoke, each word as sharp as a finely honed blade slicing through glass. "I just received information from my son," the voice declared. "His name is Marcus Bennett. He has been moved from his first-class seat despite his ticket being entirely valid. I don't care what excuses have been offered. I want you to verify this immediately and ensure that my son is treated with the respect and rights he deserves. And please, pay close attention to the way the head flight attendant is handling this situation." The captain scribbled down notes rapidly, nodding even though he knew Victor could not see his gesture, and replied with a measured tone, "Yes, Mr. Bennett, I will handle this personally, immediately." After ending the call, the captain placed the phone back on his desk, his thoughts now divided between the current flight path and the troubling events unfolding behind the reinforced door. It became evident that the individual responsible for this brazen display of cruelty was none other than Claudia Harper. A few minutes later, a summons was dispatched to the service cabin. There, in the modest kitchen area tucked behind the first-class cabin, Claudia was adjusting her hair in a small mirror attached to a mini fridge. A faint smile played on her lips, as if she were savoring a minor victory, convinced that she had successfully expunged a disruptive element from her pristine domain. In her mind, everything was exactly as it should be, and she prepared to carry on with the remainder of the flight, quietly basking in the silent approval of passengers who shared her narrow views. However, her confidence was soon to be shattered. A young flight attendant approached her with a respectful bow and a measured tone as he said, "Miss Claudia, the captain requests your presence in the cockpit. There is something urgent to discuss." For a brief, almost imperceptible moment, the triumphant smile on Claudia's face faltered. A rare occurrence indeed, since it was unusual for the captain to call a flight attendant mid-flight, unless the matter was of utmost importance. A flicker of unease crossed her eyes, but she quickly composed herself, straightened her uniform, and strode briskly toward the cockpit. As she moved through the cabin, a few pairs of watchful eyes followed her, as though the passengers sensed that this was not the end of the story, but merely the opening chapter of a far larger and more troubling conflict. Once Claudia crossed the threshold into the cockpit, the atmosphere in the passenger cabin shifted noticeably. The once murmuring crowd grew silent and heavy, as if anticipating the fallout from the confrontation that was now in motion. The captain lifted his head from the instrument panel, his gaze cool and measured, and motioned for Claudia to take a seat in the vacant chair opposite him. In a low, deliberate voice devoid of any unnecessary pleasantry, he began, "I just received a direct call from Mr. Victor Bennett." He paused, allowing his words to settle in the charged silence before continuing. "He wishes to review the handling of this flight, specifically regarding the case of passenger Marcus Bennett." At the sound of his name, Marcus Bennett, the only son of Mr. Victor Bennett, Claudia's composure seemed to crumble. It was as though an icy current had swept through her, draining the color from her face and leaving her skin ashen. Her eyes widened and her lips trembled, yet she could offer no immediate response. In that silent, suspenseful moment, the power dynamics had shifted dramatically. Claudia, once so sure of her authority, now found herself confronted with the full weight of consequences that came from undermining a family known for its unyielding stand against injustice. Her internal world, once dominated by arrogance and cruelty, now teetered on the brink of an irreversible collapse. The gravity of Mr. Bennett's intervention hung in the air like a storm cloud, promising that the reckoning for every unjust act would soon be unavoidable. For Marcus, though still confined to the narrow window seat in the cramped economy cabin, the events unfolding above in the cockpit filled him with a renewed sense of cautious hope. Even as he felt the weight of humiliation and isolation, he also recognized that his silent battle was being witnessed, and that justice was no longer a distant promise, but an imminent reality. The unfolding drama, a collision of cruelty and the steadfast determination to uphold dignity, resonated deeply with those who had borne witness. In that poignant, uncertain moment, Marcus's struggle became not just his own, but a clarion call for fairness and respect that echoed far beyond the confines of that single flight. Claudia's face went pale, as if she could not quite believe the words that had just reached her ears. The captain's calm, measured tone had repeated the name. His son? The boss's son? That revelation struck her like a bolt of lightning, and for a moment her mind reeled in disbelief. Her hand clutched the edge of her navy new jacket so tightly that her knuckles turned white, and a bitter lump of dread formed in her throat. It was as if she were being forced to swallow the shock whole, her usually sharp, confident voice reduced to weak, fragmented whispers. In that instant, Claudia, who had prided herself on nearly 20 years of command over the cabin, felt as if the very ground had shifted beneath her feet. Every calculated, cold action she had taken to dismiss Marcus Bennett, the young man she had so disdainfully humiliated from the moment he entered first class, suddenly came crashing down on her. She had believed herself untouchable, an unyielding force in the skies, but now the reality was unavoidable. Marcus was the only son of Victor Bennett, the powerful owner of the airline who could erase her entire career with a single nod from his office. The captain's steady, unyielding gaze left no room for excuses as he offered a slight nod, silently confirming that any attempt by Claudia to justify her actions was far too late. For Claudia, it felt like being pushed into a bottomless abyss, where every ounce of pride she had built over the years was being stripped away in an instant. She could not remember the last time she had felt so out of control. Once the undisputed head flight attendant who could silence the noisiest passenger with merely a glance, she now found herself trembling, her sharp eyes failing her, as she realized that the teenager she had so casually ridiculed from first class was none other than the son of the man who wielded absolute power over her future. For a long, excruciating moment, the silence in the cockpit was broken only by the low hum of the engines, as Claudia forced herself to stand and mechanically bow in thanks to the captain. Then she hurried out, her steps unsteady as if she were walking on thin ice. Her heart pounded wildly in her ears, and as she made her way back through first class, a small crowd of passengers began to watch her with curiosity. They sensed that something monumental had just occurred, although no one could be sure of the details. Claudia's eyes darted anxiously toward the door leading to the economy cabin, as if she were searching for a way to remedy the unspeakable mistake she had made. Every move she had taken with Marcus had been cold, calculated, and ruthlessly unprofessional, following a well-worn pattern. Dismiss the young man, push him aside without explanation, and leave no room for debate. Now, however, Claudia's unyielding facade was crumbling. With every step through the cabin, her mind raced with the realization that a single, irrevocable mistake had been made. For the first time in her long tenure, Claudia found herself asking almost desperately whether a simple apology could possibly undo the damage. Could it be that she might somehow reverse the humiliation she had inflicted on Marcus Bennett, the boy whose name now carried the weight of an empire? As Claudia's pace quickened, her palms grew damp with sweat and a cold fear gripped her heart. She hurried past rows of seats in the economy section, her eyes scanning the aisle as if desperately seeking the very person she had so carelessly cast aside. Never before had she felt such paralyzing dread. Every step was heavy with the realization that the very passengers around her, the ones who had once silently admired her command, now looked on with a mixture of pity and smug disapproval. Some faces were blank with indifference, while others betrayed a hint of outrage at the injustice they sensed in her actions. At last, her gaze fell upon a small window seat where a young black teenager sat quietly, leaning against the backrest as if lost in thought. His hand, still loosely holding his phone, betrayed the lingering hope that had once flickered inside him. For a brief, charged moment, Claudia froze. The boy she had so arrogantly dismissed mere moments earlier was now unmistakably Marcus Bennett, and the realization hit her like a tidal wave. All the cruelty and prejudice she had wielded without remorse now came crashing down as she understood the full magnitude of what she had done. The name Bennett, synonymous with absolute power on this flight and beyond, was now etched into every regretful thought running through her mind. Her once unshakable confidence lay in tatters. Claudia's self-assured persona, built over years of exerting control over every detail of service, was now shattered. She swallowed hard, trying to gather the remnants of her professional composure, and then, with a strained smile that did little to mask her inner turmoil, she awkwardly approached Marcus. Bending slightly to meet his eye level, her voice softened in a tone that was unfamiliar to her colleagues and passengers alike. "Marcus, right? I truly apologize for the inconvenience earlier," she stammered, the words heavy with a mix of confusion and desperation. "There may have been a misunderstanding, and if you'd like, we'd be happy to invite you back to first class immediately to ensure your utmost comfort for the rest of the flight." Her tone was meek, a stark contrast to the icy, commanding presence she had previously displayed. Marcus looked up at her with calm, steady eyes that betrayed no sign of the seething anger one might expect. Instead, his expression remained polite, his slight smile conveying nothing more than a desire to maintain his dignity. "Thank you, but I'm fine," he replied in a quiet, resolute tone. "I'll stay here for the rest of the flight." Those simple words, uttered with the dignity of a man who had endured far too many injustices, cut through Claudia like a sharp blade. She had expected him to accept her apology, to be grateful for the opportunity to return to first class, but his refusal was a clear statement, a statement that she had failed to repair the damage caused by her actions. Claudia blinked rapidly, struggling to swallow the rising embarrassment that now choked her as effectively as any reprimand. She tried to salvage the situation by adjusting her smile once more, this time even more forced and hollow than before. In a low, almost pleading voice, she offered, "If you need anything else, drinks, snacks, blankets, anything at all to make your flight more comfortable, please don't hesitate to let me know. We truly regret the incident." Marcus's polite nod and calm "thank you very much, but I don't need anything" made it clear that no amount of contrived courtesy could mend what had been done. To him, the offer was nothing more than a feeble attempt to cover up the injustice with formality, and his response conveyed a firm desire to move on without further drama. For a few long seconds, Claudia stood rooted to the spot, the steady hum of the engines and the soft rustling of pages in a nearby magazine deepening her sense of failure. With a slight nod, as if conceding defeat, she turned and slowly walked back toward the first-class cabin. As she moved away, she could feel countless eyes following her every step, some filled with pity, others with barely concealed satisfaction that justice, however small, had been served. Behind her, murmurs began to ripple through the economy section. Passengers who had once been passive observers now leaned in to whisper among themselves, their hushed voices spreading like tiny ripples across a calm lake. A middle-aged gentleman sitting directly across from Marcus shook his head in dismay and leaned over to a woman beside him, his voice low but audible enough to express his indignation. "Unbelievable," he murmured. "The boy is polite, has a valid ticket, and yet he's treated like that?" Not far away, a young woman, just a few years older than Marcus, whispered softly with genuine kindness, "You did great. You're more composed than many adults could be in a situation like this." Her gentle encouragement, though quiet, carried a warmth that made Marcus's heart lighten just a little. Even an elderly woman with silver hair neatly tied up, watching from a distance, shook her head with sorrow and whispered to her companion that in this day and age, witnessing such blatant discrimination was simply heartbreaking. "The boy doesn't deserve to be treated like that," she said, her tone laden with both sadness and quiet anger. As time passed, the cabin's atmosphere seemed to split clearly into two distinct sides. On one side were those passengers who preferred to ignore the unfolding drama, their eyes drifting away as if the incident were nothing more than background noise to their own travel. On the other side were those who felt a growing sense of indignation on Marcus's behalf. They whispered among themselves about Claudia's unprofessional behavior, questioning how someone entrusted with such authority could allow herself to become so blinded by prejudice. Their murmurs grew steadily, each word a small act of defiance against the injustice that had been perpetrated in the name of service. Every so often, a glance, a whispered comment, or a subtle nod was exchanged between strangers, a silent acknowledgement that what had happened was not acceptable. Marcus, though still sitting quietly by the small window in the economy cabin, felt a strange warmth seep into his heart. It was as if the kindness of a few, the shared glances of understanding, and the hushed words of sympathy reminded him that he was not alone in his struggle. In that moment, even as the flight continued on its long, unyielding journey across the skies, a small seed of hope took root, a hope that perhaps someday the cruelty of prejudice would be met with an equal measure of compassion and justice. And so, as the flight moved steadily forward, every passenger in that cabin bore silent witness to the stark contrast between the cold indifference of one woman and the quiet dignity of a young man who had done nothing wrong. The ripples of that confrontation would linger long after the plane had landed, a reminder that even in the polished corridors of luxury, the truth of injustice and the resilience of the human spirit could not be silenced. Marcus sat quietly in the cramped economy cabin, his eyes tracing the gentle drift of white clouds across the vast blue sky outside. Even though his heart still carried the heavy weight of humiliation, a small ember of hope began to glow within him. He had endured the cruelty and injustice thrust upon him by Claudia Harper, a woman so entrenched in her narrow-minded prejudices that she had tried to forcibly remove him from his rightful first-class seat, simply because of the color of his skin and the modesty of his appearance. Her cold, calculated actions had been designed to make him feel unworthy, but now, as he gazed out the window under the warm afternoon sun, Marcus held on to the belief that not everyone would choose silence in the face of such blatant discrimination. Across the cabin, Claudia's fate was beginning to unravel in a way she could never have anticipated. Her earlier attempts to dismiss and humiliate Marcus had not gone unnoticed, even as she flustered and stumbled back to him in a clumsy effort to salvage her reputation. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder. A man seated near the aisle leaned toward his companion and whispered that he had thought such treatment belonged only in the headlines of a news story, never expecting to witness it on his own flight. It was as if every subtle shake of a head, every raised eyebrow, and every furtive glance among the passengers formed invisible threads that slowly tightened around her, stripping away the authority she once wielded with such arrogance. Marcus, for his part, remained composed. Though his inner heart ached with frustration, he kept his gaze fixed on the view outside, as if finding solace in the steady passage of time and the silent beauty of the sky. Even amid the oppressive tension, he refused to let Claudia's cruelty rob him of his dignity. Deep down, he knew that standing strong in the face of injustice was the only way to reclaim his self-respect, even if it meant enduring isolation and unkind stares from strangers who had witnessed his ordeal. As the soft whispers in the economy cabin began to subside, the familiar, steady voice of the captain suddenly resonated over the airplane's PA system. The announcement cut through the low hum of conversation and brought every passenger's attention upward, toward the ceiling. Normally, the captain's words were reserved for routine updates about altitude or weather conditions, but this time his tone was grave and deliberate. "Dear passengers," he began, his clear enunciation leaving no room for misunderstanding, "we would like to inform you that, following a direct request from senior management, all crew members and service staff on today's flight will undergo a full review of their service and conduct procedures to ensure there is absolutely no discrimination of any kind." For a long moment, the entire cabin fell silent. The word discrimination echoed in every ear, a stark reminder of what had just transpired. The announcement continued, "We will not tolerate any unprofessional behavior, favoritism, or exclusion toward any passengers on our flights. Any complaints will be taken seriously and addressed accordingly. Thank you for your cooperation and understanding." As the captain's words faded away, the subdued murmur of conversation resumed, this time more urgent and charged than before. Passengers exchanged glances that conveyed both shock and a growing determination to stand against injustice. It was clear to everyone present that the incident involving Marcus was not an isolated mistake. but a serious breach of the values that every traveler deserved to uphold. In first class, Claudia's earlier confidence was now in tatters. The steady hands that had once expertly served meal trays now trembled as if gripped by an invisible noose. Every step she took down the aisle felt like walking on shattered glass, and every passing gaze from the passengers stung her with the weight of their silent judgment. She could feel the scrutiny intensifying, and with each step her carefully constructed facade of authority began to crack. A few passengers lifted their eyes from books and screens, casting fleeting, knowing glances in her direction. Some even sipped their wine while raising an eyebrow, as though relishing the rare spectacle of a woman in power being held accountable for her actions. Marcus, still seated by the window, continued to watch the world outside. Though the humiliation of being forcibly moved to economy had cut deep, a small yet resilient spark of hope was growing within him. He knew that the solidarity of a few compassionate souls could make all the difference. Somewhere among the hushed voices, a kind young woman had whispered words of encouragement, assuring him that his calm resolve was far beyond what many adults would muster in such circumstances. Even an elderly woman, her silver hair neatly tied, had silently mouthed that no one deserved to be treated with such disdain. These quiet affirmations, though soft, resonated deeply within Marcus, renewing his strength to endure a little longer. As time passed, the atmosphere in the cabin became charged with anticipation. Then, the silence was shattered by the sound of the airplane door swinging open. Every head turned as Victor Bennett, the revered owner of the airline, stepped onto the plane. Tall and impeccably dressed in a meticulously tailored dark suit, his presence commanded the space around him. His rimless glasses concealed eyes that were as cold and sharp as steel, and with every deliberate step, it was evident that nothing on this flight escaped his notice. Behind him, two senior executives followed in lockstep, their faces mirroring the silent tension that gripped the cabin. Not a single passenger moved or spoke as Victor made his way directly toward the economy section. Every eye was fixed on him as he approached the row where Marcus sat. When he reached Marcus's seat, his gaze softened at the sight of his son. Marcus, who, despite all he had endured, still maintained a calm and resolute expression. Without uttering many words, Victor leaned down, placing a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder, and quietly asked, "Are you okay?" Marcus met his father's concerned look with a small, weary nod and softly replied, "I'm fine, Dad." Victor's slight smile conveyed a promise that the burden of injustice would no longer be Marcus's alone to bear. He straightened up and turned his attention back toward first class, where Claudia was waiting. At that very moment, Claudia, who had been trying desperately to mend her earlier transgressions, now found herself face to face with the man who held the fate of her career in his hands. As soon as Victor's gaze met hers, any trace of the strained smile on her face vanished. It crumbled away, leaving her looking hollow and defeated. Victor advanced slowly, each step measured and deliberate, until he was just a few paces away from her. His voice was calm, yet carried the weight of final judgment as he addressed the entire cabin. "I want to clarify something in front of everyone on this flight," Victor began, his eyes scanning the room to ensure that every passenger listened. "This issue is not about my son's identity or his rightful place in first class." He paused, letting his words sink in, then continued with measured authority. "It is because every passenger, regardless of age, skin color, or background, deserves to be treated with the same respect and dignity. Today, that standard was not met." His voice was firm and unyielding, resonating through the cabin as if each word were a solemn decree. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. All eyes were now on Claudia, who stood with her head bowed and her hands clenched together as if awaiting a sentence. Victor did not raise his voice, nor did he display overt anger. Instead, his disappointment was palpable. A disappointment not born of personal vengeance, but of a deep commitment to fairness and the values that his airline was built upon. "We will handle this matter thoroughly," he concluded softly yet decisively. not out of personal vengeance, but because it is our responsibility to uphold fairness and honor on every flight. With those words, Victor's gaze swept over the room one final time before he turned and left Claudia standing there, utterly bereft of her former power. For Marcus, who had been silently absorbing every moment of the unfolding drama, the arrival of his father and the subsequent address filled him with a bittersweet sense of relief. He did not smile in triumph, nor did he display any victorious satisfaction. Instead, he remained quietly composed, understanding that true strength lay in the restoration of truth and dignity rather than in retaliation. Behind him, the murmurs among the passengers grew louder as they discussed the incident and the captain's unexpected announcement. Many expressed their indignation, their voices tinged with a mix of pity and moral outrage. They recognized that what had happened was not merely an isolated incident of unprofessional behavior, but a deep-seated injustice that needed to be addressed. In that long, tense final stretch of the flight, the cabin was filled with an air of both anticipation and solemn resolve. The passengers, who had once been content to let the world pass by in silence, now seemed united in their silent demand for fairness. They understood, even without speaking a word, that every person on that flight deserved to be treated with respect. And as the aircraft finally began its descent onto the runway, every eye in the cabin was fixed on Claudia, a woman who had once commanded power effortlessly, but who now found herself stripped of all pretense, facing the inevitable consequences of her actions. Marcus's gaze remained on the window as the plane touched down, the white clouds now a distant memory of a journey marred by prejudice yet illuminated by a quiet, enduring hope. He knew that the events of this flight would be remembered not for the cruelty he had suffered, but for the resolute stand taken by a family determined to restore dignity to every passenger. And as the plane's doors finally swung open, the passengers braced themselves for the next chapter. A chapter where truth, fairness, and compassion would ultimately prevail over the narrow-minded arrogance that had once sought to diminish a young man's worth. The pride that had once carried Claudia Harper through every step of her long, illustrious career now lay shattered at her feet. Every glance, every word she had spoken with unyielding authority over the years was crumbling under the watchful eyes of passengers who had once feared and respected her. Victor Bennett, the man whose name carried absolute power in the airline, did not take his eyes off her. His gaze was not filled with personal hatred, but was cold and decisive, like a knife slicing away any last remnants of her defiant shield. In that moment, the high-flying head flight attendant, who had been so sure of herself and her position, found that her world was collapsing around her. Victor stepped forward and stood tall in the aisle, his hands clasped gently in front of him. With a low and steady voice that echoed like the final verdict of a trial in mid-air, he announced to every passenger on the flight, "I would like to inform you that, effective immediately, Miss Claudia Harper, our head flight attendant, is suspended from her duties pending an internal investigation into serious discriminatory behavior that goes against the core values our airline has always upheld." His words were delivered with such gravity that the entire cabin seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. It was clear to every person present that justice was being served, not from behind closed doors, but openly and directly for all to witness. Victor's announcement continued as he swept his eyes over the room, ensuring that every passenger understood the seriousness of the matter. "We deeply apologize to passenger Marcus Bennett and to all of you for allowing this unacceptable situation to occur. I promise you that this will never be allowed to happen on any of our flights again." His tone left no room for argument or doubt. The captain's message resonated with everyone, and for a few long seconds the plane was enveloped in silence, punctuated only by the soft hum of the engines. The word discrimination, spoken out loud, struck a chord deep within each listener, uniting them in a shared understanding that every passenger deserved to be treated with respect. Almost immediately after Victor's words faded, a single set of hands began clapping slowly at the back of the cabin. What started as one soon became a chorus of applause that spread like a warm, reassuring wave through the entire airplane. Every clap was not just an approval of Victor's resolute action, but also a quiet, powerful declaration that fairness and dignity must prevail over prejudice and cruelty. As the sound of applause grew louder, Marcus, who had endured so much humiliation, simply tilted his head back and scanned the room. He did not smile, nor did he join in the applause. He maintained his calm, measured gaze from start to finish. For him, this moment was not a victory to be celebrated with boisterous joy, but a return to the rightful place of fairness and justice, something that should have been evident from the very beginning of his journey. Claudia, on the other hand, stood frozen as the thunderous applause echoed around her. Her once unshakable confidence had been reduced to trembling hands and a heavy heart. Every clap felt like a hammer blow to her pride, each sound intensifying the humiliation and sorrow that surged within her. She tried to lower her head, as if to shrink herself into invisibility, but the weight of every gaze and every whispered comment from the passengers made her steps unsteady. Slowly, with a sense of crushing defeat, she turned her back and began to walk toward the rear of the cabin. Her retreat was silent, yet heavy with the knowledge that not only was her career hanging by a thread, but that the very standards of decency she had long taken for granted had been shattered by her own actions. As Claudia disappeared behind a small door at the back of the plane, soft whispers began to rise among the passengers. No one spoke with overt mockery or derision. Instead, there was a mixture of astonishment and quiet satisfaction in the tone of every hushed conversation. People exchanged glances that spoke of a long-held hope that fairness would one day triumph over narrow-minded prejudice. In that moment, the entire cabin seemed to agree that what they had witnessed was not just an isolated incident of unprofessional behavior, but a turning point where the values of respect and decency were being restored for everyone on board. After the plane landed, the atmosphere shifted from one of tense expectation to determined action. Victor Bennett, ever the decisive leader, called an urgent meeting with the top management of the airline as soon as the aircraft touched down. He made it clear that this incident would not be swept under the rug as a mere blip in an otherwise perfect service record. Instead, he demanded a comprehensive review of the entire service process and announced the immediate institution of mandatory training programs on equality and anti-discrimination for every employee, from flight attendants and technicians to those in management. The new training program was not a dry recitation of rules. It included candid discussions and realistic role-playing scenarios that forced employees to confront their own unconscious biases and reflect deeply on the impact of their actions. Real-life stories like Marcus's experience on that fateful flight were shared as powerful reminders that even a single careless remark could deeply wound a person's self-esteem and cause lasting harm. In the midst of this sweeping reform, Claudia Harper's name was not forgotten or swept aside without consequence. After spending a long time away from her position, during which the public uproar gradually subsided, Claudia eventually wrote a heartfelt letter to the board of directors and directly to Victor Bennett. In her letter, she did not beg for forgiveness or simply ask for a chance to return. Instead, she poured out her deep sense of humiliation and regret, acknowledging that her actions were not isolated mistakes, but the result of years of ingrained arrogance and prejudice. She explained that for so long she had been trapped in a glass cage of her own making, unable to see how her narrow views had blinded her to the true meaning of service. In her letter, she requested the opportunity to rejoin the airline, not as a teacher of service standards, but as a humble student, eager to relearn what it truly meant to serve every passenger with genuine respect and care. After several private meetings and thorough discussions guided by the humanistic principles that Victor Bennett had always championed, the airline decided to give Claudia a second chance. She was allowed to return to work on a trial basis under strict supervision, with her primary responsibility not only to serve passengers, but also to demonstrate a genuine commitment to the values of fairness and equality. This trial role was seen as a chance for her to prove that she could change, to show that even someone who had once wielded power with cruelty could learn to serve with a sincere heart. On a later flight, the sky was clearer and calmer than it had ever been on that troubled day. Victor Bennett and his son Marcus boarded the plane together and walked into the first-class cabin with quiet dignity, free from any pretense or arrogance. They enjoyed a private journey filled with mutual respect and understanding, a stark contrast to the storm that had once raged on board. Marcus sat in his seat, gazing out the window at the billowy white clouds drifting gracefully by, his eyes reflecting a calm that came only from enduring and overcoming injustice. The atmosphere inside the cabin was now transformed. The professional flight attendants served with warm, welcoming smiles and a genuine respect for every passenger, their eyes free from judgment and their actions guided by kindness. No one asked about Marcus's background or who his father was, for it had become clear that every passenger was to be treated equally, without exception. As the plane slowly glided through the vast American sky, Marcus offered his father a small, grateful smile, a silent acknowledgement that the true victory lay not in retribution, but in the restoration of fairness and dignity. Victor nodded in agreement, sharing with his son a deep, unspoken belief that respect is not a gift given by privilege, but a right that must be protected by everyone through courageous action and steadfast persistence in the face of wrongdoing. This story reminds us that when one person stands up at the right moment, it can change the course of an entire journey. The transformation that took place on that flight was not just about disciplining one individual. It marked the beginning of a far-reaching reform within the airline. It demonstrated that with enough determination and a commitment to doing what is right, the truth and righteousness will always prevail. If you were a passenger on that flight, what would you have done when you witnessed such an injustice? Please take a moment to reflect on this story and share your thoughts. Perhaps, like Marcus, you believe that true strength lies in maintaining one's dignity, even in the face of cruelty, and that together, we can build a world where every person is treated with the respect they deserve.